Hello, just do a slightly different video. We'll link up to this ongoing series I've been uploading recently in Ancient Legacy. But it begins in Sydney, and again, it will be a detour, but will be linked. And so what we have here is the Ibero American Plaza, a series of busts and a couple of statues there just outside Central Station in Sydney. And again, just so here in God's country, Australia. And of course in Sydney, the Ibero American Plaza. But what we have, so there we see the view, Ibero American Plaza. What we have is a series of independence leaders, as well as towards the end, a couple of navigators. This constant, well, what do navigators do? They weigh and they measure and they map. They're into maths, geometry, and the quadrivium. But there's a lot of interesting connections here. So the first statue, we're beginning here with Benito Juarez, very important figure in Mexican and again independence. And here we see him on well, he was a Freemason, and what we find is that many of these figures here are independence leaders, and they're Freemasons, which is again still across South America and the Philippines. Find a very strong influence to their important poet, journalist, politician, writer, very important in Cuban independence. So he was again fighting the Spanish and again outside forces. So presumably he's fighting the establishment for independence, and that they have strong Masonic connections through there. Now, more than a few sites have named him to be a Mason. I didn't find any official lodge membership, but certainly all those around him were. So he was at the very least surrounded by Freemasons who were fighting the home establishment independence leaders, which goes, so just like Christianity. And I was a few months ago I was having speaking to a Mason, and he was again saying there's no copyright on this. It's like anyone can start a Christian church, and there's no way to stop. There is no copyright on that, and that applies to this theme as well. And so just like Christianity, you can define it as one large broad entity, but it's not under a single authority. There's so many different disputes, and you often find that people within any one religion, Christianity for example, actually hate the other variety of their own religion even more than what they do outside religion. So this applies to any large organization. But Cuba, we see the coat of arms, the key, the sun rays, but the Phrygian cap, that's one of your first giveaways. And so very important in Mexico. This is the Grand Lodge of Cuba. Like with most things in Havana, it's become a bit dilapidated, but we see the 12 hours of the clock and the zodiac, which is like the procession or the year. 12 months of the year. These are important symbols repeated, and again, even the celestial sphere and the G. So not much of a giveaway, but they've had a strong and an influence throughout. So I'll put the link in the description, the Bohemian blog. But also describe especially how the smaller lodges, everything else might be dilapidated, but you see that these are still brought together because these organizations were so strong about organizing community, mutual aid, they would provide pensions, scholarships, and all these types of things. When most descriptions, when they talk about these organizations, they just put them straight into the royal court or to the heads of the major banking houses. That's the 1%. And just like there is a 1% within Christianity who are so far above everyone else that they're really separated, this same thing applies. And so with these small community lodges, it's community based, and that's something that's really, really ever talked about. It's like saying the 1%, like Rockefeller's a Baptist or something. It's like saying Rockefeller represents baptism. But that's just not, or Presbyterian, whatever. It's just not really. These figures are so far apart, and to say that they define the larger group. Again, it's like saying a CEO, his average wage somehow describes the rest of the population. There's just no correlation between the two. Seminario, very important in Peru, but the interesting one. So now we go over to the Philippines, and Dr. Jose Protacio Rizal, again, pardon for my pronunciation. He was a Mason. There's even in the stamp clubs and stuff I have him there you see him in his regalia. Now he was an important figure getting rid of the Spanish, but soon as he helped the Americans in the Spanish-American War, then in that period, well, the Spanish Empire was essentially just taken over by the American Empire, and then he basically became a prisoner to the American forces. And this KKK represents the Katipunan movement. Again, this was about Filipino independence, nothing to do with the Ku Klux Klan. It's a different movement, and it's a fraternal organisation. And so this organisation was just immediately organised, and it was about mutual aid. So you had these independence fighters, who would look after one another. They would pool resources, pool their energy, and that type of thing. But you can see this is like they have all the elements of Freemasons. So the apron for one, and again they're independence fighters. So that will give you a hint to what this is about, because they got rid of the Spanish to just have another empire take them over. And here are their emblems, and they're all the standards on Masonic tracing board. So the Americans, who would have had plenty of Masons that they were fighting against, they were also using the same thing, just as an example. But these things are never clear cut, and there is no copyright on these symbols or these patterns. It's very, very, it's again like any organisation, or not even organisation, but any sort of Catholics, Buddhists, Jews, Muslims, Hindus. There's different sects and different organisations. So everyone, you could say that's a Hindu, but that doesn't really describe the nuance that goes throughout them, because many Hindus are opposed to what the others believe in. Chile, General Don Bernardo O'Higgins, again, now he is Mason. This is Juana Padilla from Bolivia, Antonio Noreno. Colombia's got a lot of links. Again, you might pay attention to the feathers, but again, Phrygian cap, the cornucopia, and even a few other little symbols, but that's trying to keep this under 15 minutes. Okay, Simon Bolivar, hugely important, especially in Venezuela, and even in the Parliament building, massive portraits of him everywhere. He's a national hero, and he was, again, a conscientious Mason. So just like Australia's version of George Washington, who was a Mason, was Governor Lachlan Macquarie. George Washington was opposed to the English establishment. So, if it was this one grand overarching conspiracy, this would not really have happened. And the same thing happened in Australia, where we see conscientious Freemason Lachlan Macquarie stood up to the establishment, broke the English class system, brought in more egalitarian laws, big social reformer, and changed a lot of things. And he went against his orders, and he started building a nation rather than just expanding the penal colony. And so again, he was against London, and what would be London, the United Grand Lodge of England, headquartered in London. Again, these things are not as clear as they can be. Eugenio de Santa Cruz Espejo, pardon again pronunciation, in Ecuador. Again, you can just check out the coat of arms and stuff, and again, they've got the Phrygian cap. But the important one here is Jose Gervasio Antigues, and Uruguayan national hero. Now, his family were members of Freemasonic lodges, but he was amongst the 33 Orientals of Uruguayan independence. Now, the English lodge is different from the Oriental lodges, which are more centered in France and continental Europe. As their headquarters, it's, for instance, the Grand Lodge in Brasilia is an Oriental lodge, and that's relevant because of a few things. Okay, first we have his mausoleum, an unfinished pyramid. Shaft of light comes down to illuminate his remains in the urn. This being a standard symbol you'll see in the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, Vortrekker Monument, so many others, where this beam of light comes down through the ceiling to represent the darkness of ignorance and the light of, or illumination and knowledge, but this of course also has reflections going back to ancient Egypt and the mansions of light, as they're called, and the Benben stone, which arose from the primordial waters, especially like in the breakaway religion of Akhenaten, the Atun being the sun god, and yeah, so there are a lot of Egyptian and other ancient cultures have this similar themes. But what's interesting is, so we have Uruguay, and then we have the state of Triente y Tres, or the state of literally translates to 33, the capital city, Triente y Tres, the city of 33. It's just south of the city, is exactly 33 degrees south. The postcode itself is 33,000, and it's, like, again, quite literally named after the 33 Orientals, Uruguayan independence leaders and Freemasons. So across South America, we have a very, very strong, in independence movements, we have these very strong traditions. So whether it's London or Madrid or Paris, we have these Masons who are presumably against other Masons, and just as again, these things are not clear cut. Unfortunately, the Icke-Jones school only talks about the 1%ers. They don't represent the broader church any more than the billionaire Catholic represents the slum dwellers in Rio. The coat of arms, 33 Orientals, again just similar symbols. So we go over to Argentina, General Jose de San Martin, Freemason connections, coat of arms, Phrygian cap. The flag, we see the sun there, 32 points around the sun. Now we look at the Plaza de Mayo, Buenos Aires. We see the monumental axis of the city with the dominating obelisk, just like Washington, D.C., just like Astana and other cities. It's a common theme in these connected places. Mentioning Astana, that's the capital of Kazakhstan, 32 rays around a 33rd central point. So what we have is this 32 to 33, just like the flag there, and this is commonality of symbols. But the interesting one is Prince Henry the Navigator. So we're going back to the late 1300s, 1400s. There were no official lodges as we would think of them at that time. But Prince Henry the Navigator, so he was gathered knowledge, discoveries, geographical, astronomical, mathematical, as well as practical information, and he gathered these things together. He was in search of older maps looking for this type of stuff. So he's in the quadrivium. He's a guy who's working on weights and measures. He's into astronomy, maths, and geography, cartography. 32 over 33 being essential. The old mapping systems of the time was a 32-pointed wind compass around the 33rd central point. This is a monument to the discoveries in Lisbon, Portugal. So what we have is the monument itself represents a ship. We'll see it better in a moment. But the opening ceremony involved 32 ships of 14 other nations. So 32 ships with the 33rd at the opening ceremony, which is a common theme. So we see the compass rose donated by South Africa. Just happens to be 164 feet, which is this common ancient measurement going way back, including this ancient mapping system. So the Perry Reese map, if you've seen those old maps of Antarctica, of South America pre-Columbus, this is the mapping system they're using. It's not the straight across and down longitude and latitude we know now, by using a different, and that's it there, this compass rose method. So we have 32 ships, 33rd on shore, 32 rays around a 33rd core point, and also on the monument itself we see 16 important navigators, scientists at the time, with Henry the Navigator being the 33rd. So 32 all to get 16 on either side, and Henry being the 33rd. It's just another, again, just the same themes repeating. Now it's also interesting that the monument to the discoveries is 66 feet wide, 33 times 2. Again, this ancient measure that just keeps reappearing throughout time, and is always connected to these types of monuments, cathedrals, major public buildings, which have these connections to these exact figures and these exact themes. And so anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed and have a good one.